All right, well, let's go ahead and call this meeting, the UAB workshop to order. Robin, if you can do the roll call, please.
Thank you. Member Lewis is absent. Member Sperlingwood is absent. Member Rockwell.
Here.
Member Crow.
Here.
Member Fultz.
Here.
Member Morse.
Here.
Member Cubby. Mr. Cubby is absent. Member Paul. And Chair Jacobson.
Here.
All right.
All right, thank you. Now for the adoption of the agenda. We'll entertain a motion related to that.
I move we adopt the agenda.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Sorry?
A second.
Oh, okay. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed, nay. Unanimously. So this is a workshop, it's a little more, or a little less formal. So I guess we just jump right into our discussion items. So the first item is the GRU quarterly update for the third quarter. We had the choice when I talked with Tony earlier about whether to talk about AMI. I asked him to go ahead and cover all the pieces of it, but feel free to speak up if you'd like more detail or more brevity on any of these items.
So Mr. Chair, I'll just kick off. So what we started with the city commission in June was to give a quarterly update on various topics GRU topics to the city commission. And so I think when the chair and I discussed it, we had scheduled to do AMI with this group, but I had suggested, let's just do the whole quarterly update, which includes the AMI CIS update, but also includes an update on DHR fuel and fuel sourcing, as well as our Main Street project that we're doing, a capacity and renewal upgrade project to the Main Street. And so again, we'll be doing these quarterly with the city commission, and I think we can agenda them with the UAB as well. It's just items that don't require action, but are big items, either big projects or work that we're doing that is critical to the operation of the utility that we can just give updates on a regular basis, on quarterly basis. So with that, we have plenty of staff here that are going to do different parts of the presentation. So I'll ask Chad Parker to come up to start. And Chad, I think, is he doing it at the podium?
He wants or he can say whatever first.
So Chad will lead the discussion on AMI, and then Kenzon Hutchinson will also be part of that as our chief customer officer to lead the discussion on the customer information system. So this is both the meter project as well as the customer information system, and they're very integrated, working together. And so that's why both of them are leading those projects, and they'll be presenting today. So with that, Chad and Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. Good evening, UAB members and all. We'll be going over the AMI and CIS project. And so the first thing because we're going to be utilizing acronyms, I want to just to state what CIS is, and CIS is the Customer Information System. And it's known as the Project ICE, which we utilize as just terms to kind of identify what it is with internal employees. And so this is where we're going to improve our enterprise software, which is our customer database.
Okay, so same for AMI. So AMI stands for Advanced Metering Infrastructure, and sometimes referred to as smart meters. AMI is the best practice in the utility industry. And through two-way communication, the AMI system tracks near real-time usage of electric, water, and gas consumption and monitors the health of utility infrastructure while providing better services to our customers. So why is AMI important? So we broke it down to 4 key elements. The first being operational efficiencies, gaining those, customer benefits, environmental improvements, and customer engagement. So we'll break down operational efficiency. So we'll see efficient and accurate meter reading. So some of you may know, it's a really high turnover rate right now in the meter reader area. So just keeping folks in those trucks and rolling out there and walking those routes and getting meter reads, it's difficult these days. So this will help with that. It'll eliminate a lot of truck roll. So every time a customer moves in or out, we're going out to read that meter. All those truck rolls will be eliminated. We'll pull those reads remotely. We'll have remote disconnect and reconnect functionality for electric meters. So that's going to save truck rolls there too. It's going to improve safety. So we do see, significant number of dog bites over the years and things like that. So we'd eliminate a lot of those things. We'll have faster response to customer outages and improve outage restoration. So right now we're relying on a customer to call in and say, hey, my power's out. We'll be able to see all of that outage notifications now. The system's designed to send the notifications, and then we'll be able to pinpoint where those outages are so we can send a crew right to that location. So we're not trying to track down an outage.
Next slide. Just a few customer benefits that we will receive by having AMI and CIS connect integrated together. Of course, we would have improved, like Chad mentioned, improved outage restoration times because we can identify, it's easy for us to get to the customers at that point. But a real big one is on near real-time usage, which is extremely important because it's where we empower our customers with information to where they can curve different behaviors and whatnot, which is definitely beneficial. Also leak detection, assisting customers with water conservation, of course, and also a reduction in estimation. So there's been times where we've had to estimate bills because extreme weather, dog issues or locked gates, extreme weather. And so this will be able to help, reduce that to where the point we don't have to really do that anymore in the future. Next slide. Also, from a customer engagement point, definitely have a mobile engagement to where customers can utilize the information. It'll be at the on their cell phone devices, not from an app, but it's mobile friendly to where it adjusts to the different item that the customer is utilizing. Also, to be able to notify customers of any issues for leaks in homes, high usage, whatever settings that they want to state to make sure that they can be empowered to utilize to help customers with their utility assist usage. And also reduction in call times. So the more information customers have at their fingertips, the less they really have to call, which would reduce the call volume as well. But also it will help us with first call resolutions because we'll be able to look at the information that the customer have and we'll be able to walk them through what they see as well as what we see. Next slide. From an environmental standpoint, we'll be able to reduce carbon footprint, of course, reduce fuel consumptions because we're not rolling trucks, and also reduce emissions out there as well. Next slide.
All right, so how does AMI work? So each day, meter information is sent electronically to 51 collectors located around our service territory. These collectors route the data to the AMI head-end system and the meter data management system. So that data all comes in there, it gets processed, it gets validated, estimated, whatever. It's looking at that data, it's cleaning it, basically making sure that there's no errors in it. Once that's done, it'll send all that information to the CIS system and billing system to prepare bills. And then customers can access and monitor their consumption via a self-service web portal, empowering them to make informed decisions about budget and conservation. So how did we get here? So more than 75% of US homes are equipped with AMI now. Commission approved $46.8 million for AMI implementation and $32.5 million for operations and maintenance. Over 20 years, it's a 20-year contract with Itron. It's hosted in the cloud. They provide the meters and endpoints and the communication network. GRU also hired temporary labor to mass install meters, and the project kicked off August 2021.
As it relates to the CIS project just the same, it kicked off. We had a CIS system in place in 2007, hadn't had any upgrades since then. And so it's a really good opportunity for us to really upgrade our system to where it's hosted in the cloud. And also it would help us from security patches and updates that we would have in the future. And so City Commission, they approved $30 million for us to upgrade our system. It's a 10-year contract with Vertex One. As I mentioned, it's hosted in the cloud, which helps with continuity and also making sure that we have the latest version. Project kicked off in March 2021, and we're looking for a successful go live in February 2023.
So where are we now? So on AMI, we're in the design and build phase. We designed the system, we're building all these environments. So you have a head-end system, you have a meter data management system, you have production environments, test environments, development environments. All that has to be done. We're working on that. We're 90% of our network infrastructure has already been deployed. So that's your communication network. These devices are out in the field now. And we're on schedule and on budget. So some of the things we've been doing. So we built a meter farm. It's complete and it's being used right now for testing. So we have electric, water, and gas out there. So what we're doing now is all these meters that are coming in these different environments, we want to make sure that all the configurations that we built and put in there are matching up. So we're running consumption on these meters and testing all of that. We built a solar access point for outside of our electric footprint. So in other words, we have gas and water in areas that don't have electric coverage. So in order to power some of those devices, we may use some solar on there. So we've been working on that. We developed it. It's not something that's commonly used in the industry for these devices. It's something we're testing and checking reliability on that. So that's something that's pretty cool. And then our meters and endpoints are currently being manufactured and shipped. So they've came in, we've done first article testing on them. They look like they're supposed to, and all the configurations are in them. We've basically been testing them, and now they're going to manufacture and ship them.
Where are we now, which is a big thing, is communication. So we've been educating customers in advance of AMI. We've been putting out door hangers. When customers call in, we've been informing them. Also, we've been putting inserts on bills and whatnot, because I believe that the more communication you give to customers, the less calls we have. And so we've been trying to educate customers in advance. Next slide. And so currently right now, we do have a dynamic online bill payment portal. Also with Spanish, we're able to take a look at that. But the big thing here is we're able to really show customers where they are with utilization, how things are. And as I mentioned earlier, the more information we're able to give to customers, more information we're able to show them, the more empowered they are to actually curb behavior. Next slide. Kind of where we're heading. And like I mentioned, the more information we do have out there. And so we do have plans to where customers can manage their usage through information, notifications, and all those type of gadgets that we'll be able to utilize. And so here's one that's just showing Water Smart. And so over time, we'll be able to give customers more tools to play with. Next slide.
So AMI. So it's broken down in several phases. So the first phase, we're going to install approximately 100,000 electric meters, 75,000 water meters, and 37 gas modules. We're going to install an AMI communication canopy. And like I said, we're almost done with that. We're going to implement a meter data management system. We're going to integrate the AMI system with the Vertex One system, the new CIS. We're going to transition to billing using the AMI system. And we're going to integrate into our outage management system. And then phase two. So I will say that all of our meters have been configured to accept time of use programs now, prepay, DI applications of meters equipped with that in it now. It's just turning that function on, figuring out how we want to use it, and smart street lighting. So the network can carry all of that. It can carry DA devices. It's robust enough to carry all that traffic. So those are things in the future, but we built basically a non-blocking strategy to make sure we can do all of that stuff. But the biggest piece of this puzzle is just getting the network built, get all the meters out there, build that mesh, build a strong network. Next slide. So where are we right now? So you can see we're still in some of the design and build phase for the AMI project. The CIS, we're in the realize phase. We're in the third sprint, and we're just starting system integration testing between the two. So we built the links, and we're working through those test cases right now. And then we're looking at starting to deploy meters into our solution validation area around mid-August. So that's going to be an area within the city that has 4,000 meters of all different types. And we're going to test the technology, check the reads, check the reconnects, disconnects, all the stuff that we expect this system to do. We're going to test it there. Once that tests out, we're going to move right into mass deployment at the end of the year. And you'll see CIS go live is January, February of next year.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the board? Hey, John.
Promise Rob, I wouldn't get into technical stuff. But in the customer service area, do you have a company standard for answering telephone calls, X amount in 45 seconds or 20 seconds? This will
So,
help.
yeah, so currently right now we have service levels to where residential, we answer 80% of the calls within 5 minutes. 3 minutes, 5 minutes for residential and 3 minutes for business. What this is anticipated to do is reduce those calls. And the type of calls that we receive later will be more in-depth calls for customers who just really doesn't understand the information that's there.
You have a robot in front of that?
I couldn't hear you.
Is there a robot that answers first before the customer service agent comes on?
No, so we do have through the IVR system to where it talks, but we do not utilize AI at this time, which is automated intelligence.
Why don't you explain a little bit of the IVR, what the IVR does?
So what the IVR is, it's when you call in and you can press different things. And so one of the things that you can do is if a customer's calling for our office hours, you can press the button and it will answer those questions. Other things is when we're located, when their customer may be due for disconnect or whatnot, you can get that information out of the IVR system. And at that point, a customer can triage and be utilized from a residential or a commercial by pressing those buttons.
Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. The UAB has been wanting this briefing on the AMI for a long time, and this is exactly what we've asked for. And I want to say thanks to Tony and to yourself. Number two, I'm interested in the time of day option that you said is coming along. Can you give us any idea of what the schedule is for that? Or are there any impediments? I mean, do you need additional budget allocation or technology or training or anything that might hinder that?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So right now, for a time of use program, the meters are configured to accept time of use. But ideally, we'd want to get a population of meters out there. You want to build the network. You want to have all your meters rolled out before we roll into something like that. We could probably start testing it out prior to, but that wasn't budget-wise. That wasn't a, prepay option. But a time of use option is something that we would do internally. We'd start looking at the rating, the rates, forecasting that stuff, how we're going to develop that. But all the time of use stuff is built into these meters. And again, so GRU, there's resource constraints here as well. So just being able to do all of that stuff while we're trying to implement a CIS and AMI project is proven to be rather difficult as well.
Yeah, and let me add on, Mr. Chair. So if you look at the schedule, next, starting late fall of this year will become the mass deployment of meters. And we're replacing almost 200,000 meters total when you look at gas, water, and electric. And so our focus at this time really is getting that communication network in, getting the software in, and then getting the meters in. And then as we get ahead of that, that's where the phase 2 consideration, starting to consider what are those phase 2 functionalities we can get out. But we want to make sure we stay focused on the primary, getting the system in, getting the meters in, and then those types of things will be explored of how do we leverage. I think there'll be probably more than what we have on that phase 2 of things that we can do and leverage with this information and with the system being in, but we just don't want to lose sight of that core phase 1 activity.
Is this all Itron?
It is.
Itron meters and Itron software at the front end?
It is.
Once you've got the time of day hardware in and software in. It would be ideal, of course, to have a billing structure that reflects that. Are you planning to adjust the billing structure for time of day use?
Yeah, so again, Mr. Chair, I think that's more to come on that. So I think that's all on the table as possibility, but we haven't sort of fleshed all that out. And that'll be as we get the deployment going and we get down the road, we'll start considering those options.
That time of day pricing could have a major impact on the IRP.
Thank you. Anyone else on the board?
Yeah, I want to echo Fletcher's comments. This is a really exciting project to me. I appreciate the update and everything you guys are doing on this. When you mentioned the slide that had customer benefits, you said assist customers with water conservation. I assume we also meant energy conservation as well. There's going to be opportunities for that as well. Great. And then I'm just curious how seamless of a process you foresee this being for customers. So I'm wondering, like, for your like older customer that's not tech savvy, that just pays their paper bill every month, you know, whatever, is there going to be anything that they need to do differently? Or is it basically, are we just talking about sort of increased functionality for people that want to make use of that?
Mr. Chair, I would say both. Definitely that, but customers who may have trouble with adapting to the new technology, we're patient. We'll still have things that's in place to where if a customer call, we can walk them through the bills just like normal. But for the tech savvy individuals, customers, we're definitely going to be pushing that information out there for them to pick up and run with those things. So a little bit of both.
So just like, I mean, thinking from the perspective of like, because I do tune-ups for these kinds of folks all the time, somebody that's in their like 70s, gets their paper bill every month and they pay their bill, you know, whatever, like for that person, what are they going to need to do different? What is going to change for them beyond like their current situation?
So I guess, Mr. Chair, it goes back to, we're going to continue to do some of the same things that we offer those customers now. I guess the biggest thing is just constantly educating them, even through energy surveys. And I know you do those, but just energy surveys, if a customer call, going out and working with them to kind of help them with this, because I don't think so customers who may not have the technical background to be able to utilize this software, I don't think it's much that they may desire to do differently, but still having the same resource that we have available, I think is going to be beneficial for them.
And I'll also just add, Mr. Chair, like, so we will be able to maybe have some, I don't know, alerts or something, I can't remember the right terms, but alerts or something to where it alerts a customer service rep that this customer is using significantly more power than they were using before. So we could also do things that are proactive with customers. So even if they're not receiving that, we could set up, and again, these are all things, we're looking at best industry practices and how best to do this, but we get an alert that makes us call a customer or email or an automated email goes to a customer and says, you use 20% more power than you did last year at this time, or, you know, something like that. So I think there are some of those things that are going to be push things as well as pull things for customers.
Or water leaks.
Correct. Yep, you can do. I
have
was
different
involved
alerts.
in several meetings of talking about what's the alert level to where then that pushes something out to somebody that says you probably have a water leak. You know, so there's ways to set up, collect the data, analyze the data, and automate when and where to do that. So all of those things are things that the team is exploring of what will be all those levels and then how we'll implement it when it goes live.
Thank you. And I think the water leak, and I use that with people when they ask about AMI a lot, because people get that. All of a sudden, something breaks. We're so sandy, you could lose a tremendous amount of water without knowing it until that bill shows up.
Yep.
And you're so sorry that you use that water. And so this is a fantastic, I'm very excited about the possibility. I deal with customers calling who have questions, and I can't tell you any customer I've ever put in a system like this for who hasn't learned something. It's tremendous what it can do. In there, you talked about the distributed intelligence applications. What can you tell me what that means?
So basically, there's a lot of applications for distributed intelligence, and looking at these new meters, there's some that are kind of, you know, basic smart meters that have that functionality. And then you have some like the ones we purchased that are capable of, Itron builds different apps for, EV charging, things like that, different applications and all that stuff would run through your meter. And these meters are capable of handling that. They have expanded memory in them. It's basically a cell phone in that meter, you know.
But and that kind of got to one thing I was gonna, we're interested in EV and demand size management. So it sounds like you've built in at least the infrastructure necessary in the future to say, okay, GRU would like to turn on your EV charger right now. 'Cause we got power, we don't know what to do with. So you.
Oh,
you
yeah,
guys are
that's all built into the meters.
Fantastic.
It's capable of doing that. It's just, once we get it all rolled out, then we'll start looking at it like that. Different types of apps that we want to move forward with.
So on the timeline, I saw the start of the mass rollout. When do you think that's gonna end?
So, I will tell you, a lot of it's dependent right now on available hires, workforces. And then also the supply chain, it's rough right now, but
I know how hard it is to buy a meter right now. It's
yeah,
tough.
so we've been fortunate enough to not really see a huge impact, but you know, I can see it coming down the road a little bit, so.
Do we should, and I won't hold it to you. I'm sure someone else might, but I see how conveniently it's a bar that just kind of goes off the screen.
Yeah.
What's your guess?
So we were looking at 2 years is what we initially looked at. Maybe a little longer for like water, just so you guys know, water's in the ground. We gotta go out there, we gotta dig them up. That's a process. And making sure that we have enough folks to do that. But so, I mean, we're hopeful that we'll get enough resources in here. Supply chain will still keep rolling in and we'll get these meters deployed in a few years.
And I'll add, let me just kind of add to that. You know, I think it's the whole 80-20 or 90-10 or 95-5 rule. I mean, we're gonna get, in those 2 years, we'll get most of them. I think there are gonna be problem meters, there are gonna be places that are challenged. That doesn't keep from us using the system with the meters that are in. I think that's important. So there might be meters it takes years and years and years before we actually get to, and we get it. But we're gonna get most of the system in and it'll be functioning and we'll be able to use the system within a couple of years, and then some of the other ones might be down the road.
And go ahead.
So the way we're gonna deploy it is based on routes, so meter reading routes. So as we deploy these, we won't have to go back out and read those routes, and we'll know which ones we can remotely turn on and off, which ones we can read. So we'll start seeing benefits, the first route that we complete out there.
Okay. One more question on it, and then Tim had a question. This one I get. I'm a huge believer in it. People say, well, okay, with all the cost of electricity, all these things going up, why are we spending millions of dollars on these programs right now?
So I'll just give you a real quick story. So we get calls all the time, customer calls, and a lot of it comes down to customers use energy, but they don't really know what they're consuming. They don't know, and they wait till the end of the month to see a bill. And I'll get calls and they're really large bills. And one of the big things for me is these customers now could log in and they could monitor their usage. They'll be able to see what they're using and they'll know halfway through the month, okay, well, I really need to cut this back so I don't have a bill I won't be able to pay at the end of the month. I see that all the time. I think that'll be a huge benefit to customers.
It empowers the customer.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, not to put words in your mouth, I believe from what I've seen, my experience, it'll be a net saving to the customer to have that ability.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll just add two answers to the question. So one answer is, this 21st century utility has AMI, right? 75% of utility customers across the country have AMI. And so we're kind of catching up a little bit with regards to that. And the second piece is the number one person that can really help an individual reduce their bill is themselves with behavior. This provides additional information for someone to be able to change behavior and save money. And so for that individual, this is a tool, data, and information that can help them do that. So.
And just to, looking at the future, it's a changing world out there. We talked about EVs, all this stuff has to be there, time of use, all that stuff. So, Tim?
Thank you. I was just curious, from a labor standpoint, it's not really that onerous. You're really just swapping out the meter. They largely plug into the existing housing, or is there more to it than that?
So electric is a lot of plug and play. Water, there's different applications of water. Now water's been out there a long time. So some of it is really labor intensive to change that out. And also once we start touching those pipes that have been in the ground for a long time, we're gonna create some leaks, we're gonna find some issues, and we're gonna have to make repairs to that. Gas is pretty straightforward, but the thing to remember about electric and gas is a lot of this stuff is in backyards. lock gates. So that will slow us down. Some, just like us going out and reading meters, sometimes it's a difficult task to get meters read. So, but it's not that it's really labor intensive. It's just that it's,
Coordination. Thank you.
All right, it's a workshop. It's a fairly small group, but I don't know if anyone from the here from the public wants to ask anything. Yes.
So what's the lifespan of these meters? So how are you going to deal with maintenance? Are you gonna hire more technical personnel to deal with it?
yeah, so the life's 20 years. And even the modules, the battery powered devices have a 20-year lifespan. That's all contingent on how much you pull reads on it, but they're looking at pulling, your regular interval data once a day, pulling that information from it. But, if you were to look for register reads all the time, you'd kill the batteries more often. And that's stuff that we're going to be testing in our meter farm. But yeah, 20 years on electric meters.
Do they have warranty?
They do.
How many years?
It's all based on the type of, whether it's a module, whether it's a meter. I have all that is anywhere between 3 to 5 years, and then it's prorated up to, I can't remember the exact year.
Okay, well, thank you. Oh, John.
It's two-way communication, so if you have an outage, what do you call it, you get a signal back.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And that's a big benefit too, when you're asking about benefits, just seeing where those outages are will improve restoration. Greatly.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, we won't even have to call in. You guys will see it, what we do. All right.
Welcome to your inverters before long.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, guys. So I guess we'll move on to a less controversial topic like DHR.
That's right. So Eric Walters, Eric's going to come up and present on basically our DHR fuel, where we get our fuel source from. And again, feel free to interact and ask questions as he goes through the presentation.
Thank you, Tony. So, chair members, I'm going to adjust this a little bit because I use my hands. I can see myself knocking this over really quickly. All right. So, chair members, my name is Eric Walters. I'm in Fuels Operations Director for GRU. So I'm going to go through today just a DHR overview of the fuel and where it comes from. As you all know, DHR is our largest source of renewable energy within the city. It's also a very important part of our energy base. When you look at it, it's vital to our reliability of the system because of the fuel diversity that it provides, right? It helps to lower costs and also keep the system resilient within itself. So since we took over in 2017, we get a lot of questions about it. We get a lot of interest in the fuel and the origins and where it comes from and how do we source it and how do we monitor it and all that. Along with that, we also get a lot of misconceptions. And so hopefully this update will answer some of those questions, give you a refresher of where all that comes from, and also hopefully clear up some of those misconceptions. So next slide, please. So what are we going to cover today? First is the 3 categories of fuel. We'll talk in more detail about these 3 being the mill residues, urban, and also in woods. I want to talk about the last 12 to 18 months of biomass fuel sourcing, where it's come from, and also talk about the minimum sustainability standards as well. Next slide, please. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about mill residues. And there are 3 types of mill residues, basically pine bark, dry residuals, and wet residuals, right? The good thing about mill residues is that it's very high quality, high BTU content per volume, right? There's large quantities produced, but there's also a lot of buyers, and your supply and demand curves tells you, well, when there's a lot of buyers, it's also more expensive, right? So you get high quality, you get a lot of volume, but it's also very expensive. So when you look at those aspects, it's also not very responsive to surge demand. All right. When you talk about surge, you're talking about expected and unexpected. So expected would be seasonal changes. A heat wave comes through like we've had the past, 10 days or so, and you have elevated loads on a short period of time. Unexpected could also be a loss of a supplier, another fuel supplier, or a forced outage of another plant where now it has to ramp up in the short term to cover that loss, either for a few days or up to a week. And now you've got to bring in more fuel to not deplete your resources. So when we talk about surging, mill residues is great, high energy content, but it doesn't surge very well. And it's also very expensive. So historically, that's been about 5% of our fuel source. Next slide, please. Next, let's talk about urban. So our urban supply is the most variable category, right? And when you look at these attributes, you see ash that range from 1 to 8%. But what does that mean, really? So when you think about yard debris and things that come along with urban wood waste in this supply chain, when someone puts a tree limb by the road, it could have fallen yesterday or it could have fallen 3 weeks ago. That wood looks very different. It behaves very differently when you handle it, right? So when you go to burn it, it also behaves very differently as you burn it. So those same characteristics that change also affect your combustion. So we absolutely have very little control over the condition of all that wood when it gets to this aggregator to be processed. So that's where you see all the variation between the moisture, between the ash. The way that it's handled is it's basically brought in by an aggregator, it's sorted and processed, and it's ground. So it's very fibrous. It looks like strings almost when you pull it apart in some cases. So it makes handling more difficult and it makes combustion more difficult because of that. So with that, it's also prone to have some foreign materials in it. It could have plastic, it could have metals in it. We try to sift all that out. The aggregator tries to pull all that out and sort it, but you don't get 100% of it, right? And also those variations lead to handling problems and combustion concerns, right? For the very same reasons. Because you don't know what you're getting, you're grinding it and you're putting it together, but it's such a various quality of material in there. The range is very high. It's also very irregular. So some of that is, again, if it's a storm and you have a lot of down limbs and trees, well, that available volume could be very high in a dry season or you know, depending on the time of the year, that volume could be very low. So irregular quantities. And it has a limited response in surge demand, a little more than the mill residues, but still very limited. Historically, this fuel source has been about between 10 to 25% of our fuel. Next slide, please. So let's get to the bread and butter of what we really take care or take in, and that's the inwoods. And it's the foundation of our fuel supply. It's mostly hardwood, and a large volume comes from what we call site prep cuts, right? We've all driven down the road and seen pine trees planted in rows upon rows, straight lines. They don't grow that way naturally, obviously. They're being planted and groomed for future harvesting. The value is in the pine, right? So with that, when they clear out all the pine, you obviously have some things that are left over that are not pine. They could be hardwoods or various types of wood. What would happen or could happen is those, harvesters would clear that land, continue to prep it for replanting, and those things would sit and they would either burn it on site or they would just pile it up and let it rot. That's what we're after, is going through and getting those things that normally would have no value in the pulp and paper industry or what have you. We're saying, hey, bring it to us. Let's reuse it. Let's prep it. Let's process it. And let's make some energy out of it. And that's where the largest majority of our fuel sources come from. It is processed at the site by a chipper. And so you can think of, instead of fibrous material, you think of chips that are in your hand. It's a lot easier to handle. It burns a lot better as well. So your consistency in handling and your combustion are all pros for that, this type of fuel source. It's the most consistent quality, the largest volume, and most reliable when you go to scale up. When you go to surge, this is where most of your capacity comes from, right? So historically, it's been between 60 and 90% of our fuel source. And this comes back to one of those misconceptions that I talked about earlier. People have a misconception that GRU is causing forests to be, leveled and clear cut for the biomass. Absolutely not the case. We're not causing any of that to happen. Now, if a developer is clearing land to put a building there, sure, we'll take advantage of the things that have been cleared out and use it for energy, but we're not going to cause that to happen. Part of that is part of the minimum sustainability standards, which we'll get to here in just a second. So let's talk about the sourcing over the past year or so. About 12 to 18 months. These are actual percentages of what we've burned. So the in-woods portion has been roughly 75% of the fuel supply. The urban wood portion has been about 22%, and the mill residues has been roughly 3%. So our woodshed, or where the wood comes from, is basically a 75-mile radius around the plant. So North Central Florida, take DHR, draw out a line out 75 miles and sweep it around. That's kind of our woodshed, where most of our supply comes from. When you dial it down, most of it, the overwhelming majority, comes from within about 55 miles. Okay. What we pay for this wood is depending on transportation, obviously the distance that it comes, and also the quality that we get for it. Just as a note here, I wanted to make sure I pointed out that we don't accept developer debris. Part of that is some of the risk. It has higher potential for foreign debris, foreign matter to be in it, and also the integration of chemicals that put our emissions permits at risk. So we tend to try and stay away from that. We don't take direct deposits from customers. You don't know how many phone calls I'll get. Can I cut this tree. I got it in the back of my truck. Can I drop it off at the plant? No, sir, I'm sorry, you can't. You got to go through an aggregator, somebody that's going to sort it, process it, ship it, and then deliver it to site for us.
Real quick, Eric, what is developer debris?
So when you drive by and you see a dumpster and they're making a house, so random 2x4s and ends and cuttings and so forth, we don't take any of that. So let's talk about the minimum sustainability standards. Another question I get often is, well, how do you know what you're doing? And how do you know what you're getting? So part of that question, when the original contract was made and before the plant was built, the minimum sustainability standards were developed. And the purpose is basically to ensure that suppliers abide by responsible biomass harvesting standards, right? That you're not just going off and clear cutting land again, and you're not bringing these things in from nefarious sources, that you're being responsible. The focus is on the longevity and health of the forest. That was the primary objective of these standards. They were developed by a group of forestry professionals and consultants as part of the contract. Before a vendor can supply to DHR, they must agree to abide by these standards. That's the first step. Also, as a part of this, all suppliers must attend annual sustainability and best practices seminars. And those are given by professional foresters and managers that say, here's the sustainable practices, here's what we're doing, here's updates in the industry, and how to better comply to those. And of course, everyone always asks, well, how do you know? Well, we hire a third-party independent auditor that comes in twice a year to verify. They do site visits. They work in conjunction with our on-staff arborist, Joe Wolf. They go out to the sites, they visit, they check chain of custody, they do all those things to verify that these suppliers are actually meeting these standards. And they give us a report twice a year that says that fact. So I believe that is it for me. So I will take any questions that you may have.
Any questions from the board?
Yes,
Nice presentation, by the way.
thank you.
In terms of megawatt hours, particularly totally generated by GRU, what percentage comes out of this facility?
Great question. So when you do the math, you're probably looking at a quarter or so, maybe a little less, 20%. What we produce every year is probably about 1.6 million megawatt hours. All right. And then we produce from this facility historically anywhere from 350,000 to 500,000 megawatt hours a year. So quick math, depending on the year, will get you in that range.
Do you have a feel for what the cost per megawatt hour is?
It's a great question. I went to the pump yesterday and it hurt when I filled up my car. It really hurt. And everyone else is feeling that pain of fuel sources going up. And you guys have heard about fuel levelization and fuel funds and you know, that balance and the fuel adjustment having to adjust. Well, our fuel costs have gone up considerably as a result of that. The one good thing about biomass is that it is very consistent. Since we took over the plan in 2017, the price has been almost rock steady. Now it's starting to go up because diesel price, truck driving, availability, all those things are going up. But right now, DHR is the cheapest unit that we have by far. The next closest unit is roughly twice the price. So the biomass is the cheapest megawatts we have right now.
And it's around 30.
It's around $35 to $37.
Thanks.
Okay. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the longevity of the three fuel streams that you mentioned. I'm wondering what sort of opportunities there are, if any, to kind of widen the potential fuel inputs, and if there's any need to be thinking about any sort of a like resource protection plan longer term to help assure that we have these fuel supplies going into the future.
Great question. So I'm not an arborist and I am not a forester, right? But I know enough to be dangerous. I know during the start of this plan and the origination of the contract, there were a number of studies done by multiple contractors or consultants. The longevity basically said, yes, they could support a 100-megawatt biomass plant for the next, 20 to 30 years within that 75-mile radius, right? And that we're considering the inwoods for that, right? And so more detailed answers, I would have to depend on Joe Wolf or go to the forestry experts to say, do we need to do something now? Has that changed? And what are the long-term impacts? Every indication that I get is that that's still valid, that there's no concern about long-term fuel supply, but they will be able to talk more in detail about that.
Can I just piggyback on the back of that question? Are there any regulations governing how many biomass facilities can be in proximity to each other, drawing from the same fuel source that would create
Sure.
competition for the fuel?
Sure. So chair members, there are no regulations per se that said you can't source, within this woodshed, right? There are things that they look at as far as sourcing and financing for those. That was one of the main concerns about the original financing of the plan, is how much fuel was there. If you start to put another 2 or 3 biomass plants within the same woodshed, well, now you're going to have concerns about whether you can supply that long term. And the short answer is we would have to look at that, look at the study and forecast what that would do to the fuel, get an idea of whether that fuel was available and what we'd have to pay for it, right? So there, you can't put multiples without looking at that available fuel source. For the fuel that we have, or for the plant that we have, long-term view, there's no concern that I know of about fuel source. If we start to add a second or a third, that would obviously be something that we'd have to look at more closely.
What about, say, another electric company in a close by region?
We wouldn't have any control over that per se, but it will be the same kind of thing as far as looking at the wood supply. There's no, I guess you have the PSC that says service territory and all that. To my knowledge, there's nothing that exists that would prohibit someone from doing that, right? But I would hope that they would want to look at the long-term supply as well and realize we're pulling from the same source.
Thanks, Jason.
Sure. And I just had one more question. I'm glad that you addressed kind of upfront this sort of community misconceptions, because I've definitely heard that from people in the community, and you see it on social media and whatnot, that the biomass plant is driving some of the, cutting and things that we see in the community. So I'm wondering, to go back to the, independent third party compliance that you talked about, what sort of information reporting is actually like readily available to the public? Let's say I'm talking to somebody in the community and I'm telling them this and they're really skeptical. They don't believe what I say. They don't believe what GRU says. What can I point them to where they can actually like see this evidence for themselves?
I am not sure if these reports are, I'm sorry, chair members, I'm not sure if these reports are on the website, but it is something that is available by public record request, and we can make those available. We get a summary report every 6 months or so of what they did. And it doesn't go into every detail of, hey, here are all the sites and here's who we talked to. But it does say we visited so many sites, we verified these things while we were there, and here's your justification that we are satisfied as a third party that you are meeting these standards.
And so that could be
So that-
available to somebody from a public records. request.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's readily available.
The IRP that was studied last year talked about a second biomass facility. As I know, you wrote the darn thing, right? Can you go into some detail about that, your thinking, or I don't know, plans for the future, or how clear that is, or funding issues, or fuel supply issues with wood? What the issues that have been discussed with that second plan?
Sure. So Chair Commissioners, let me do a broad scope and then I'll dive in a little deeper. So you're right. We're in the process. That last IRP did recommend a second biomass plant, and it was trying to reach a net zero sum as far as the goals for the city of Gainesville and GRU. Some of the things that we looked at for that plant is we looked at briefly talking to local foresters and experts. What is the woodshed and the wood supply? We feel that there's a possibility that we could source a second one, but the price would go higher because I believe that radius would expand from 75 miles out to something longer. So now you're paying more for transportation and depending on where you're pulling from, right, those prices are going to go up. So that was a factor in that original IRP and that study. When you look at the current IRP that we're embarking on right now, I believe you can't be remiss and leave out the fact that DHR went commercial in December of 2013. 30-year typical lifespan of a plant is 30 years. So 2043, you're going to be retiring DHR. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean one biomass plant, it means two, right? And so those are the studies and those are the kind of things that when we expand the study period for the second IRP, the goal is to try and capture some of that. We didn't capture that in the last time frame because it ended in 2039. So that retirement of DHR wasn't there. When you look at this new scope, we're going to go out at least 25 years. So you're going to capture the retirement of DHR number one or the replacement of DHR number one, and then the cost and long-term impacts of a DHR number two. And so all those are factors that will go into that IRP. So you'll get a study of that within the context of the IRP. Now, when you go to build that plan in whatever year that is, right? We'd be remiss not to do a full fuel study on the supply before we go and do that. We're making some assumptions now because we don't have a detailed study to go on, right? But when you get there, those will be the things that you'll look at and dig into in more detail. To really hit net zero and meet your regulatory concerns and requirements, I believe you're going to have to look at replacing DHR when it retires and possibly adding a second DHR, a second biomass plant.
What about environmental questions with the DHR?
Can you be a little more specific?
Well, from other reports we've gotten in the past, it showed that everything's within EPA limits and that sort of thing. Is that all cool, or are there any issues that we need to be aware of?
There are no issues to my knowledge. We do continuous emissions monitoring on DHR like we do our other facilities. That facility is routed every year to verify the accuracy of those documents. I mean, not the documents, but the instruments. So I don't know of any environmental concerns, overages, emissions, or anything of the sort.
I have a couple questions. So I heard you say that the next year's cost of power production is over double, basically double DHR. So running quick numbers, that means that the fuel adjustment increases we've seen recently would have been 10 to 20% higher if we didn't have the biomass plant.
They definitely would have been higher. DHR is, we're getting as many megawatt hours as we can out of DHR to help lower the cost.
Which I think can't be. Now, I definitely don't want to go back and revisit how things happen with DHR, how we got here, but
Wash your mouth out with soap.
Sitting down. If you ask me that question, I'm sitting down. I'm done.
Don't want to have that discussion, but now that we have it, this diversity has been fantastic. Like Jason, I get that all the time. I can tell you for sure that you say you're pulling for 75 miles. Someone's trucking it for 150 miles, and they're dumping it 75 miles. They're cutting down pine trees. They're all this stuff. Now, what I tell people is, and I'm saying this so you can tell me if I'm right or wrong to say this, forget the monitoring, forget all the regulations. You guys don't pay enough for someone to cut down pine trees or to haul wood 200 miles to get DHR. You guys are just too cheap. Just the
Mhm.
economics aren't there. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. The bulk of the cost that we pay for wood is transportation distance. And if you're asking for double the transportation than the distance warrants, then that's going to be a red flag and that's going to be a no-go. And the other is the quality of the fuel. So if you're asking mill residues, which is very high quality, you're asking those mill residue prices, but you're delivering me, ground or in woods material, then that's going to be a red flag as well. So those things help to balance each other out and making sure that what we're paying makes sense. Otherwise, the supplier is going to lose money, and why would they continue to do that?
Yeah, so someone with a stand of pines is not going to cut down pines to bring it to you guys. 'Cause they
Right.
Sell it somewhere for a whole lot more.
For a
money.
whole lot more money.
Okay, thank you.
It is hard to visualize the 55, enough wood coming from a 55-mile radius. Maybe a map that you can show people would be beneficial. Anyway.
I have to run the numbers real quick. 55 miles times IR squared. That's a lot of-
Yeah, it is, but it's still,
I hear what you're saying, though. It is hard to kind of picture.
that's because a lot of wood. Yeah. But
And
anyway.
the other thing, just to get on my soapbox just for a second, that people don't appreciate, I think a lot of times about DHR is that as much as I shouldn't speak for others, as much as I love solar, it's a variable thing. If we want to meet FERC and NERC requirements, this is something we have that allows us to get base load, to have any chance without spending an enormous amount on batteries at today's dollars. So it's a huge, if you look at other utilities in the state, our renewable content is over 30%, most less than 1. So this is a big deal. And I don't know if people appreciate that enough. One final one, it's the net zero question of DHR. Now, obviously, as an engineer, I can tell you it's not net zero. There is cost to getting the wood, to bringing it there, to all the ancillary. Do you have an estimate of?
Off the top of my head, I don't. Typically, we roll back as far as the fuel source itself. We roll back on the EPA and the carbon neutral designation that they've given it. We don't have the expertise to go and question that or try and change that. So we take that as the standard, and if they want to change that, then we'll adjust. But for right now, that's the standard that we go by. I don't have an estimation off the top of my head of the total, I'll call it carbon footprint of delivering fuel to DHR.
Thank you. Because one of the things Tony's asked for, what we want to see in the reports, the monthly reports, and one of the ones that we've been getting is, here's the CO2 impact, and DHR looks bad.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to see something out of the report that would give the net CO2 impact of DHR, so it could be shown on a true relative, life cycle basis to other plants.
Mhm.
Okay. Anything from the public?
Yes, Chair. I have one question, and that is, I understand how DHR has been contracted in terms of capacity in order to be more efficient and provide just what you need. Could it be re-expanded?
Well, we have so Chair, members, we have some limitations on the equipment that's installed. So it's not a cut and paste type of exercise that takes considerable engineering and re-engineering of that facility. So there are typically limits either on generation or steam turbine capacity that limit you on how much you could do. So we are.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to make sure, I believe what you may be referring to is there was work being done to say, how low can we run this plant? Now, in doing that work, was the top end capacity of the plant reduced?
No. So I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question.
Well, I thought it had an original capacity of at least twice what it is now.
No, the original capacity was somewhere around 100 megawatts. So that I don't know of any plans or any proposals that were any more than that. Did that answer your question?
All right, I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Eric, thanks. All right, Mr. Chair, we have one more with the quarterly update, and Rachel Lockhart, one of our supervising engineers in our water and wastewater department, is going to come up. She is the project manager of the Main Street Water Reclamation Facility Capacity and Renewal Project. And so she is going to give us an update on that. Rachel.
I'm happy to hear this is a fun, cool project. So.
We like being the fun and cool people in water wastewater. It's our favorite thing. So, member chair of the Utility Advisory Board, we wanted to just come here and tell you more about what we're doing here at Main Street. It's a really exciting project, something that's been in need for many, many years. And so, as Tony mentioned, I'm a supervising engineer in our water and wastewater engineering group. And our group handles the capital improvements to all 3 of our treatment plants and 180 lift stations. So our group handles all of the design and construction of those facilities. So as you can see here, about 2 years ago, we chartered a team to put together this design build effort. And we procured Jacobs as our design builder. So you can see they're up there. So our vision statement is really to collaboratively upgrade Main Street in a design build fashion to be resilient, efficient, and a modern treatment operation. So Main Street is a very old plant. And so we'd really like to bring that up to a current industry standard so that we are doing the most efficient treatment that we can of our wastewater. Some of the bigger highlights about what we're envisioning for our team is really the trust and the collaboration, the buy-in of all of our stakeholders, of our community, trying to make sure that this is the best upgrade that we can make. It's a very significant investment for our city. And so we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to really be respectful of all those pieces. Next slide. So the benefits of the investment. And so the biggest thing that we need at Main Street is the capacity. We are a 7.5 million gallon a day plant currently. We run sometimes, depending on the wet season, dry season, we can run down to 5.5 million gallons a day, which is a great day. Sometimes we run right up against 7.5. So it's really important for us, especially as the growth and the densification happens in our downtown area, that Main Street is expanded, and we'll be looking to expand it to 10 million gallons a day. The aging infrastructure is the story you guys have heard across the country all the time. Most of the equipment in the plant is about 25 years old or more. And we're getting every piece of good out of that, I can tell you that. Our guys work really tirelessly to maintain and operate that equipment really well. We're really proud of it, but there's an end to that. And that's what we're trying to address with the aging infrastructure. And then operation and maintenance, obviously, as your car, as whatever gets older, it becomes a much more expensive operation. And so we're hoping to lower those O&M costs per million gallons to try to just benefit, obviously, our customers and our ratepayers. And then regulatory, I think we all know that that can be a wild card sometimes. And so we want to be prepared to meet those future needs, but while not going overboard, right? We don't want to overstate those, but we also don't want to miss those opportunities. So those are our major benefits of our investment in this plant. So a little bit of history just to give you about Main Street. We've owned this property since the early 1900s, about 1908, I think was the deed that we had for the property. We've been treating wastewater on it since the mid-20s. So you can imagine there's been a few iterations of treatment plants on this site, which makes it very interesting because obviously building treatment plant on treatment plant, you might find some really cool things in there. We're waiting. We'll hope there's some really cool things, not some really scary things. But anyway, so Main Street has a really long history. And so we're just really excited to kind of change that and bring it up to more modern technology. There's probably been about 3 iterations of treatment plants in here. So you'll see a little bit of the demo. You can see the demolished 1950s retired structures. We had some structures that aren't in use now that we need the real estate. We're obviously a little real estate constrained on this site. We don't have a lot of space around us. So we'll be trying to demo some of those structures and use that space to expand the capacity. This was what we kind of came with to the commission about two years ago in 2019, a little more than 2 years ago. Was demolishing structures, working on the aeration capacity of the plant, replacing the headworks. So this initial screening, everything that comes in from downtown and the gravity gets screened out in the structure. So we needed some upgrades to that. We intended to do some filter replacement and some disinfection upgrades. And that estimated cost was about $50 million at the time. All right, if you'll get next slide, please. So what we've done is we started in what we call the planning phase. So the planning phase is where we just get to start to boil down our vision into what this plant can be and what we would want it to be. And so we investigated 12 new technologies, some very interesting technologies that can't go into detail here, but they were really cool just to kind of think a little bit out of the box and see what we could apply at our site. We narrowed them down to 4 viable alternatives. We kind of based them on facility performance, operability, maintainability, constructability, and community, and then cost. And so we came up with what we call affectionately alternative 10. So alternative 10, the highlight of alternative 10 is what we call membrane bioreactor technology. So membrane bioreactor technology is used quite a bit across the state. It's really kind of the newest, I wouldn't say new, for us, it's new. For a lot of people, it's 20 years old technology, but for us, it's really a pretty neat technology that would kind of bring us closer to current. And so as you can see, we would get our headworks, what we call 5-stage treatment, membrane bioreactor, but that came with a really, really big price tag. So as you can see, our price tag was $95 million on that. And that felt like it was way too much to bear when we had only talked about a $50 million project. So if we hit the next slide, please. So we went back and reevaluated and said, what is it that we really need right now to get this plant to meet our goals, right? And so what you'll see over on the right, we called it alternative 4, but alternative 4 essentially just removes that membrane bioreactor piece and says, we'll set that aside and do that in the future. And so that's kind of what we've done. We've kind of broken this into the more palatable piece that will get us to 10 million gallons, get us still advanced nutrient treatment that will help us out with Sweetwater wetlands and our phosphorus limits there, while still setting us up for a higher quality treatment in the future. So as you can see, we landed on alternative 4, a little bit closer to 50 million, but not quite there. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So this is just a layout of the site. It's kind of turned from the first one that you saw. It's about 180 degrees. So you'll see all the teal pieces are actually the pieces of the plant we intend to touch or add to. What you'll see is there's a significant amount of electrical backbone improvement to the plant. We'll get a much better, much more reliable backbone for our electrical pieces of the plant, which obviously drives all of our equipment. And you'll see we have a master pump station. So what that's going to do is there's a lot of surcharging of our gravity system in the downtown area that kind of, it surges back up. And so what we're hoping to do is eliminate that, which will minimize our risk. It won't eliminate it, but it is going to at least reduce our risk of sanitary sewer overflows in that basin. So we're excited to be adding that piece in there. A headworks, odor control. So we'll be doing odor control. Obviously, Main Street has kind of grown up and become a little bit different view than it might have been 20 or 30 years ago. And so we'll continue to do odor control to manage that. We're adding additional treatment volume to treat phosphorus. So that's going to be in addition to our plant. And then we'll do some upgrades in filtration. And then right now we're currently sticking with sodium hypochlorite for our disinfection, but it'll have to be expanded and we'll do some operational improvements to it. But as you can see, we're touching most parts of this plant, which is just pretty exciting. You'll go to the next slide. So in the planning phase, obviously, we kind of get a big picture of where we're going. And so as we move into our design phase, which we've just started, we'll continue to kind of iterate these costs down, work on the value engineering and the concepts that will bring us a little bit closer to the price tag that we want to pay for this. And so as we get, moving farther out, we're about on an 18-month time frame for design. So we hope to come back, obviously, with more updates as Tony gives you guys quarterly updates to let you know how this is going. But we're very excited to be moving to the next phase. If you'll hit next slide. So we're moving into what we call preliminary phase. So essentially it's your planning, your design, and then your construction phases. They have fancy names because we did design build and, that's just the way it works out. But we're working on the preliminary phase. We kicked off in May, so it's pretty exciting. We're taking that big picture vision and that site map and we're drilling down into it. And we're starting to make real decisions that make real impacts and that we can start kind of putting real drawings and lines on paper. So the design, as I said before, is estimated to be about 18 months. We'll be making equipment selections as early as we can. We made mixer selections the other day. And I was like, yes, we need to do these because as you guys know, and our other folks have referenced, there's a significant amount of supply chain issues. And I mean, I've had electrical gear that's been postponed 3 times. It's a very crazy world out there. I think most of you guys are hearing this, but this very much applies to our large equipment. And so we'll want to procure those as absolutely early as possible so that we get the advantage of hopefully not too crazy of a price, which seems to be going up by the week. And then make sure we have them on site for when we start construction. Construction mobilization, we're estimating January of 2024. So that'll get us our 18 months till we're there. And then construction completion, it's going to be about a 4.5-year project. And the complication of that, as many of you guys know, wastewater rolls downhill and it does not stop. So we are having to do, as Tony has put it before, working on the car as you're rolling down the road, right? So we always have to consider sequencing and how we're going to keep that wastewater managed and appropriately treated as we do construction. So that's a big thing when you come to a major capacity expansion. Next slide. So our path forward is really just to continue with this design, continue to work really hard at value engineering and cost control and taking advantage of what we can as far as savings in the market that we're in. And then we want to just we want to get the design completed, and then we'll return. We're working towards some funding. We're trying to figure out, obviously all this infrastructure money's out there. We're trying to just figure out how that trickles down and how that applies to us. And so we're trying to use that to also kind of offset some of these additional costs that we might see from this project. And I think that might be the last one. Yeah, let's take questions.
Any questions?
So initially we were at 50 million and then now we're at 65 million. And then sort of where that's going to end up, higher than 65 or closer between 65 and 50.
I think we anticipate to try to bring it in somewhere between 50 and 65. There are certain features obviously that we can kind of trim back and decide what we're going to do in future. But yeah, the idea would that we would like to land somewhere between 50 and 65.
And Mr. Chair, let me kind of add to that. When we say we were at 50, we don't even know what upgrades we need at the plant necessarily until you start getting into the planning of it and then the preliminary phase. I mean, with the wastewater treatment plant, there's even time, you got to take the plant. Now, you may not know what you're about to find, and then you take it down and there's other costs that happen. And so I just want to be, this is being protective of Rachel. So Rachel and their team, developed this $50 million number without a lot of information. And as we get more information, when we did the planning phase is when we kind of got to, okay, here's realistic, the technology. So when they're doing the planning of it, you don't even know the technology you're using. You don't know which improvements you're doing, or totally what you need. And so through that planning phase, you do that. And then that graph of the little EKG or whatever, what was happening there is really, as you get more detailed and more information, then that kind of gets you to your final kind of cost.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I've never been to this plant. Where is it located?
So the plant is actually pretty much directly south of here. And so it is 200 Southeast 16th Avenue. It's essentially just east of the intersection of South Main Street and Southeast 16th Avenue. It's kind of tucked back in there. Unless you drive east on 16th, you wouldn't notice it. It's a pretty not obtrusive building that's tan in a gray wastewater color, but we'd love to have you if you're interested.
Yeah, well,
be happy to give you a tour.
The tours are being scheduled.
I was gonna say, I'm sure Robin's got that covered.
what else can you do on a Saturday morning other than go check the sewage, that?
I agree.
Sounds exciting for some of us, for sure.
But on a more serious note, I would have thought in your presentation, you would have started with some numbers that would say why all this is necessary and what is the benefit once it's in place with in terms of, I don't know, 1 million gallons per day or whatever the metrics are. So can you give us some metrics on this thing, the before and after metrics?
Sure. Excuse me. So the plant currently treats 7.5 or is capable of treating 7.5 million gallons a day. At peak hour, we can treat up to 18.5 million gallons. So that's what happens, when we get a storm, something like that gets pumped in. So we can treat up to about 18.5 million gallons. This upgrade would then expand us to 10 million gallons, and then we would be able to treat up to 24 million gallons on a peak hour basis currently. So that's the big capacity, the numbers expansion. It'll also take all of our equipment, and I don't know that we have a quantification of a benefit from an O&M standpoint yet as we work through our equipment selections. But those will have higher efficiency motors, all sorts of different improvements that will help us replace that older infrastructure. And I will say, most of the time when you rebuild a piece of equipment, we've done some rebuilds on our aerators. When you rebuild a piece of equipment, you might get half the lifetime back out of it, and you kind of continue to half that as you rebuild it. And so we've kind of reached to the end where we're rebuilding some of these things every 5 or 10 years instead of a 20+ year piece of equipment. So with that, we'll be putting in those new pieces of equipment that will have the longer warranties and will be, running for 20+ years.
Is that going to have any impact on Sweetwater?
So it will continue to help us meet Sweetwater's, especially our phosphorus limit there has kind of been the hotter topic. We have a 0.3 milligrams per liter phosphorus limit for the prairie. So this add the addition of what we call 5-stage Barton Faux process. But what it does is it actually does biological phosphorus treatment upstream instead of doing chemical treatment. Right now we do chemical treatment. It's, as you guys know, relying on supply chain of any kind, whether it's alum for that phosphorus treatment, sodium hypochlorite, chlorine, things like that. We're trying to get less reliant on some of those outside sources. And so with this biological phosphorus treatment, that'll help us meet that, hopefully reduce the cost of chemicals, and we would more reliably meet that for the wetland. But all of that is the wetland, I think, Tony, remind me, is 12 MGD capable, I think is what.
I don't know.
It meets, it essentially meets what's been required to put out into the prairie. But I think it was 12 MGD and we went to 10 MGD.
For nitrogen, are you saying, or just total capacity?
Total, I think.
I don't know.
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up to that?
Absolutely.
So in terms of the capacity upgrade that you mentioned, could you just talk about that in the context of like projected future water consumption in this community? I had been under the impression, maybe mistakenly, that we had been relatively flat as a community in terms of water consumption. And so am I correct on that?
So Gainesville does a really great job out of most communities at conserving water. So I have to say our community is great at that. And as we've seen with our consumptive use permit, we've committed to keeping our consumption low for, 30-year time period, right? So a lot of our influent into the plant comes actually from the aging pipes that are upstream of it. So when we have large rainstorms, a lot of times the water table will come up. We have very old pipes, so they get leaky. So a lot of our increased flow can come from what we call I&I, or inflow and infiltration. Obviously in that basin, we're continuing to densify. So this plant handles wastewater, and I neglected to tell you all this earlier. Pretty much from 13th Street East is about the area. It kind of squiggles as it gets north, but it's about that area. And so as we see all this I district and everything densifying down there, we also have some growth projections in there. Now, clearly not as huge as in the west, but we do have some growth projections. And as old as a lot of those pipes are, some of the pipes we still have in the ground are from the 20s. And so between that old infrastructure and some of that densification, that's really where our need to expand the plant to the 10 MGD comes from.
And Mr. Chair, let me just add a couple things to that. So we do have about a 1% growth rate. So it is growing, both customers as well as usage is growing about 1%. In addition to that, in wastewater treatment, we're above 80%. In fact, we're really above 90% of the plant capacity. And what happens in wastewater treatment is, even though you think, oh, you have 7.5 MGD and you're only at 7, what's the problem? Is you have to take things out of service to do maintenance and repairs and things like that. And so when you get that close, you can't take things out of service to do that work that you need to do. And so you have to expand the capacity simply so we can operate and maintain the plant properly and expand the capacity, because there is some growth that's happening, and there's growth that's happening. If you go back before the recession in 2008, growth was predominantly happening out west, out towards I-75. Used to be 75–80% of our growth was there. Now it's more 50-50 between the two plants. And so we're seeing a lot more growth and more density, as Rachel mentioned, that's happening in the city limits. So there is some growth. It's not completely flat that we're seeing. And then in addition to that, you have some of the changes in weather and with extreme events. Storm systems aren't designed to handle the intensity of storms. That flooding often gets into our system, and we need to treat that. So once storm water gets into a wastewater system, it's wastewater. And so it goes through the plant and we have to treat that. So some of that capacity is being used up with that as well.
A couple of things. First, I used to do watershed modeling in a previous life, and I know we used to use 80 gallons per person per day. And just to trumpet what GRU's done
Yeah.
and groups like CWC is what, I don't know if you guys happen to know the number offhand, but I was surprised.
59.
59 gallons per person per day. I mean, that's tremendous conservation and much appreciated. And also, I was at a climate change talk the other day, talking about sea level rise. They're currently predicting 2 feet of sea level rise by 2030. I think we'll be flooded, not with water, but with people.
Right.
I think this 1% growth, I think we're likely to see in some
Could go up.
extra capacity. Also to Fletcher's question about visiting the plant, those of us who have been there, it's old. They've done a tremendous job keeping it going, but I've had vehicles that look like that. It's time to shoot them. I mean, it's time for a new vehicle. So I don't know, the keeping it going is.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was gonna add on Member Crow's comment in terms of drivers for the project. So you initially, if you go back 5, 6, 7, 8 years, it was the aging of the system. A headworks that is 30 years old, you go up on the headworks and you can see, I mean, it's an aggressive atmosphere at a wastewater treatment plant. And so originally it was, hey, we have these aging infrastructure, we have to replace it. As the project developed and growth patterns changed, it became, we need capacity as well. And so the good thing about that is it's good that we're able to replace the aging infrastructure and add capacity jointly. You are truly killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And so that's a real benefit. And if you look at capacity and just the cost of capacity, it's very expensive, but we're getting that and we're replacing aging infrastructure at the same time. So that's why the project kind of worked out well in terms of those 2 things coming together.
Great. Anything from the public? Thank you very much.
Thank y'all so much.
Rachel, thanks. Appreciate it.
Very good. All right, moving on. We are now moving on to the distributed generation intake. Now, before we get into this one, just a quick comment or question. So I'm in the solar industry myself. When I first joined the UAB, I asked legal, what can I vote on? What can I not vote on? What's a conflict of interest? I don't know if Ms. Bennett or any would like to, I'm sorry. I know you introduced. Sorry? Larison would like to comment. What I understood was, unless we were voting on something directly related to my company, okay, Solar Impact is going to be awarded this bid, I could still vote on that.
Yes.
I tend to be a purist, and if it's anywhere near the line, I would recuse myself. So this would potentially have an impact on me. This was not an issue I brought forward. This is not one of my customers. So with that, you guys might be interested here then.
And Mr. Chair, I'm gonna add a few more things to this topic. So there were some folks that have outside of the UAB that had asked a lot of questions, asked commissioners questions, and then UAB members that had some questions. And so what we're trying to attempt to do tonight is to go through basically 3 main questions and kind of talk through the answers to those questions. Again, we want the interaction, we want the questions from you as we go. Tony Carroll, he is the energy delivery officer for the utility. He will be giving primary aspects, beginning of the first 2 questions, and then Lisa Bennett, City Attorney's Office, will address some of the legal questions associated with it as well. So with that, if you all are good, Tony will kick us off.
And so just one more thing real quick. So that we're not voting. It's a workshop anyway. So this is informational. At some point, we may be voting on a recommendation to the commission, but not now.
Okay, we're ready? Okay, good evening, Chairman and UAB members. As Tony pointed out, my name is Tony Carroll and I'm the Acting Energy Delivery Officer. And why are we here today? Well, as already been pointed out, we had some inquiries from the public about why does GRU limit the solar PV connection capacity to 2 megawatts per distribution circuit. And so that's question 1. And what we're going to answer today is these questions. And of course, question 2 is what are the results of the 3rd-party study? Well, as a result of question 1, it was agreed or asked, requested that we go out and have a third party perform a study on our distribution system to actually determine, what are the solar PV connection limits on each feeder in GRU's distribution system. And lastly, what are the legal requirements and limitations? Because there were some comments made by some members of the public that question, that we can't legally limit solar connection capacity to 2 megawatts per circuit. So we hope to answer those questions today. All right, next slide, please. Okay, to start with in energy delivery, we have an energy delivery service guide. And within that guide, we have an entire section, section 8, that's dedicated to solar PV generation connection. And in that section 8, it states that the maximum amount of PV generation that can be interconnected on any of GRU's feeders shall not exceed 2 megawatts. And I'll take this point to point out that the Energy Delivery Service Guide has been adopted as a city ordinance several years ago. I wasn't here at the time, but that's point 1. Next slide, please. Okay. So why 2 megawatts? Well, many years ago, whenever solar PV started servicing, people started inquiring about it and installing it. The leadership members in energy delivery at that time started looking for advice and reasons and some of the limitations. And so their original limit of 2 megawatts was based on a study that was done in California in about 12 years ago. And I don't want to read verbatim everything, but I will read that second bullet point that the California Commission's first iteration of Rule 21 was adopted in 1982. As initially adopted, Rule 21 was designed to meet the needs of small, non-utility owned generating facilities, namely qualifying facilities, which included renewable, non-renewable, and cogeneration plants as defined by the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. Okay, so we first, approximately 1 year ago, we were questioned by one of our customers, Target, who wanted to add 900 kW of solar PV on their rooftop and connect it to the distribution circuit that they're served from, which was Serenola feeder 936. And so we looked at our records and determined that that particular circuit already had 1.4 megawatts connected to it. And so we initially told them, well, if 900 kW is going to put us over the 2 megawatt limit. So we were refused. So they were persistent and kept coming back to us going, well, what are our options? We would really like to maximize our rooftop and we would really want to install 900 kW. So within section 8 of the Energy Delivery Service Guide, there is an option in these situations where the customer can pay for an impact study to be done for their particular scenario and determine what is the maximum amount of solar PV that can be added, or can they add the amount that they are requesting. In this case, we partnered with University of Florida Electrical Engineering Department. And so they had a team that did a study on this one distribution feeder, Serenola 936. And what they determined was that 900 kW would cause an overvoltage that would exceed our limits set by the Public Service Commission in lightly loading conditions. And so what they determined was 700 kW could be connected and not cause any voltage issues on that particular circuit. So we went back to Target and we said 700 kW is the maximum amount that you can connect. And so we moved on from there. They accepted that. Okay, well, once the other questions started to arise from the other citizens and brought to the city commission and the mayor's attention, then that's when we decided, or I should say, got the direction to, why don't you guys get a third party study done? And so we did. Next slide, please. Okay, so in this study, the next few slides, what we're going to answer is we're going to talk about the total solar PV generation that is connected to GRU's distribution system at this time. And we're also going to talk about the how solar PV can impact or affect a distribution circuit. And we're going to talk about the challenges associated with connecting solar PV to distribution circuits. We'll also talk about the third party's modeling and analysis criteria and the results of their study. Next slide, please. Okay, here we are looking at the total solar PV that is connected to GRU's distribution system. And on the far right-hand side, the total at the time the study was done was 31.208 megawatts. That's how much is connected to our distribution system. And so if you look at the rest of the slide on the left-hand side, we show the number of customers that are connected, that have solar PV connected to our system. And that first point is 262 customers are connected to our system via the solar feed-in tariff, and 860 additional customers are connected, and they're using the net metering or net energy metering contract. That middle portion of this slide shows the number of customers that are connected per phase, A, B, and C. And then that top part, ABC, that's the number of three-phase solar PV generators that are connected, 153. Next slide, please. Okay. First, I'll talk about what's on the right-hand side, and that is how distributed solar PV can impact a distribution system. Okay, it can have an effect on our main feeder and our laterals, the primary wires and cables. It can impact our loads, our voltage regulation. It can have an impact on our protective devices and our SCADA energy management system. It can also have an impact on fault current. It can slightly increase our available fault current on these circuits. And it can also impact our power flow by creating a reverse power flow conditions in some scenarios. Our challenge is that, distribution circuits were originally built to serve load radially and to regulate voltage radially. They were not designed like a transmission system to have generators, connected throughout the system and have, power flowing in a reverse direction than what it was originally intended. So that's one of our challenges. The study was done. We have a total of 70 distribution circuits, but they only performed a study on 64 of the circuits. And the reason is because the other 6 circuits either serve only one customer, such as a critical load like a hospital, or they may be a backup circuit for one of those critical loads, and they don't have any load connected to it at all. So it really wouldn't tell us anything if we included them in the study. So that's why we studied 64 out of the 70 circuits. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, as far as developing the model, we worked with a third-party vendor and gave them, the modeling the information that we use on our circuits, such as the loading criteria for each distribution circuit. What is the maximum capacity of each circuit based on the size of the conductors? We also gave voltage and imbalance issues for those circuits for various times of day, because when the system's loaded heavily during the hot part of the day or a cold part of winter, the voltage is going to be down, whereas at night the voltage is going to be higher because the system is more lightly loaded in most scenarios. Now, the third party who performed the study, during the study, they did a section by section hosting capacity for load and generation. They determined the maximum amount of solar PV or load that can be added to a section of the feeder. And they also reviewed GRU distribution system constraints such as loading, high voltage, low voltage, the change in voltage, and reverse power flow. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here we are looking at an example, or actually results of the study, and we are showing 2 substations here. And the first one is Kelly West. Kelly West has two substation transformers in it, T30 and T39. They are different sizes. One is sized at 33.6 MVA. The other is sized at 56 MVA. And you can see we're showing 7 circuits here, and the maximum allowable PV generation varies for each circuit. I mean, the minimum amount in out of this particular substation is 0.83 megawatts would be allowed to be connected to circuit 285. Whereas a maximum of 3.19 megawatts would be allowed to be connected to circuit 282. Now, you probably noticed the first circuit at the top of the page, circuit number 280, shows a negative number, negative 4.7 megawatts. The reason that's a negative number is because that is actually a backup feeder for our energy center at Shands Hospital. And so it actually has generation interconnected to it. So that's why that's showing a negative number. Okay, the next substation is Ironwood, and it's got one transformer, T411, and it has a total capacity of 33.6 megawatts. And you can see in this scenario, 3 circuits, the minimum amount of solar PV that can be connected to 1433 is 1.44 megawatts, but 1432 can handle up to 4.17 megawatts. And so what do we glean from this? What we glean from this is, while our original thought was 2 megawatts, we feel that's still a good number, without having to perform a study. But as you can see, depending on the loading of the circuit and the characteristics of the circuit, you may be allowed to connect more than 2 megawatts in some cases, but in other cases, you may be not limited to less than 2 megawatts. So that's why it's important when we start getting close to 2 megawatts, we're probably going to start asking our customers, well, and as written in section 8, do you want to pay for an impact study so we can be sure, for this particular circuit, what is the maximum and can you add what you're requesting to add? Okay, next slide. Okay, now this is a solar PV map of our distribution system. And what we're showing here is you can see on the legend in the top right-hand corner that the red areas that you see, those are the most lightly loaded distribution circuits. So those are the circuits that have less than 0.5 megawatts connected to them presently. So those are going to be the areas where, most likely additional solar PV can be connected without any issues, depending on the amount. The yellow portion that you see, those circuits have less than 2.5 megawatts connected to them when this study was performed. And lastly, the blue areas that you see, they have less than 5 megawatts of solar PV connected to them, and they're most likely not going to be able to take on any more solar PV unless the impact study indicates otherwise. All right, next slide. Okay. Turn this over to our attorney.
So there is a more in-depth opinion in your backup on the legality of the city's ordinances and manual. But I want to point out that 366.91 subsection 6 of the Florida statutes is the requirement that the city develop a standardized interconnection agreement and net metering program. And then 366.91 2D defines net metering. And I wanted to emphasize that the purpose of the net metering, as stated by the Florida legislature, is that it is allowed to a customer is allowed to offset part or all of the customer's electricity consumption on site. So it really doesn't address the distribution. Gainesville City Code of Ordinances, section 27-37 is our net metering program. 27-36 adopts the Energy Delivery Service Guide, and that is a living document. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Next slide, please. There we go. Two of the subsections of the city ordinance, I again want to point out, is the intent of net metering is to offset part or all of the customer's electric consumption on site. The net metering program's availability is contingent on there being no cost to the city. Again, it does not address interconnection into the distribution so that there's cost to GRU or the city. Next slide. The energy delivery service guide, section 8, establishes the process and the requirements for the solar PV interconnection. Section 8 is designed to protect, as Tony said, the distribution system while allowing solar interconnection when it's appropriate. Section 8 is consistent with the city code, it's consistent with the Florida statutes, and it's consistent with a recent Public Service Commission decision, which is included in the backup opinion. I can go into more detail if you want to hear that. The good news is that the GRU service guide is a living document, and as you will hear from Tony, we can make those changes as needed as the system is upgraded or as more information is available.
Tag. Okay, now on this slide, what we're looking at is our benchmarking against other utilities in Florida. And so these 4 utilities also have a 2 megawatt maximum limit on their distribution feeders. So you can see JEA, Orlando Utility Commission, Florida Power and Light, and Ocala Electric Utility. And one thing that I'll point out about, in addition to the 2 megawatt limit, Ocala Electric also limits what they will do when a customer is requesting to become a net meter customer and install solar PV at their location. Ocala refuses to upgrade the original equipment if the installation of the solar PV requires it. In other words, you know, you can't generate more than what your house is supposed to use. In other words, what was originally installed to serve your house. That's one thing that Ocala does. And I'm not aware of any other utility doing that. Next slide, please. Okay, conclusions. Okay, GRU Energy Delivery Guide follows utilities' best practices, city ordinance and PSC rules to allow solar PV in distribution circuits. The solar PV hosting capacity results indicate that some circuits can only host less than 2 megawatts, while others can host more than 2 megawatts. The customer must pay for an impact study to ensure that other customers and GRU equipment will not be negatively impacted. In addition, if it is determined that utility distribution system upgrades are required to connect additional solar PV, the customer or developer must bear the upgrade expenses. Let's say we have a plan in place right now we're going to perform a distribution planning study every 3 years to determine, you know, what is the hosting capacity at that time. Because, you know, our system's continuously changing. As a matter of fact, I believe I remember this number correctly. We get 7 net metering interconnection requests per day on average. And so the day that this study was completed, or the data that was provided based on criteria at that time, it's no longer accurate because we've added solar PV since then. And lastly, the 2009, okay, I'll back up here. Now you may think that, okay, if we average, and I'm just going to use 2 megawatts as an average, and we have, you know, to make the math easy, 70 distribution circuits. So we should be able to host 140 megawatts of solar PV without any issues. And I'm speaking in total. Well, we also have another limiting factor, unless something changes, and that is based on our present generation portfolio. The 2019 area control era study that was performed estimated that GRU is limited to hosting between 40 and 75 megawatts of solar PV, and is due to GRU's present dynamic generation capacity and recovery resources, and also NERC requirements of the balancing authority. So that is the other limiting factor that we have. Now, that could change based on, you know, whatever we decide to move forward with as far as generation in the future or battery backup.
et cetera. So, I felt it necessary to point that out.
Thank you.
Next slide. Okay,
Thank you.
questions?
Any questions on this one?
Yes.
No, reading the other, this is real. Okay, it's not make believe, but it does kind of turn old distribution engineering on its ear. Because you used to worry about low voltage, well out on the feeder. Now we're talking about high voltage, what do you call it, along the way, because it must be injected somewhere along the way with the inverters.
Right.
And
It's
and there's no
definitely-
short-term fix for something like that we know of today, is there?
Correct. The safest bet would be if there's, in my opinion, if there's any questions, then, request that the solar PV generator install a battery backup system so they can switch to the battery backup whenever issues arise. Of course, that would open up a whole new can of worms, probably.
I also read one article that they were doing some work out in Arizona, where the inverter, what do you call it, and the meters were talking to each other, what do you call it, and the inverters were taking a slightly different approach and inserting some reactants.
Mhm.
What do you
Yes.
call it into there that seemed to help? But that's, now you're talking about, what do you call it, talking to every customer.
Right. That's correct. And my understanding is that we presently require net metering customers to, whenever there's an event, that they disconnect from our system for 5 minutes and then until they reconnect. That gives our system chance to recover from the event.
And just to be clear, that's built in to the invert, all inverters, interconnected inverters have a 5-minute. It's not a GRU thing, it's just industry required. UL. Anything else, John?
Well, no, I was just saying that the article I was reading, they took the inverters took an active role in inserting some reactants in, which seemed to fix part of the problem, at least in that part of the feeder.
And just to piggyback before I give other people a chance, so we're talking about smart meters. or
Yes.
Smart inverters. So most inverters now have, and I've given some talks to GRU staff about this at their request in the past, ability to inject VARs, to do soft start. But there are quite a few things that inverters can do to play nicely. Even when the sun's not shining, they can actually do some interesting things to help maintain voltage regulation. If someone was interested in installing solar, would that be included as part of a potential study to say what is the impact on the system of this particular installation? It's to say it could be configured in these ways to minimize impact.
I would say that yes, that's an option that could be looked at.
John, did you have anything else?
No,
Anyone else?
just makes that, what do you call it, the analysis just
Oh, yeah.
that much more
It's an interesting world out there.
interesting.
Especially throw AMI in there and some of these two-way communications. There's some really cool things that could be done.
Yeah, I've got a question. You talked about the limitations, but you didn't talk at all about what might be done to mitigate the limitations. In other words, if you were going to put a subdivision in with 100 houses, each having 10 kilowatts, let's say, that might go over the limit, right? So what alternatives does GRU have to expand or redesign or enhance the circuitry to be able to handle that new subdivision? And what kind of costs are we talking about here compared to, say, the cost of solar generated for each individual homeowner?
Well, as far as what GRU could do, I'm really not sure, but the first thing comes to mind would be in that particular scenario you described would be they could install battery backup for all of those solar PV. And then when events occurred, the battery backup would kick in and the utility would not even see, the difference. Because obviously our challenge is if you have solar PV generating power for an entire subdivision, and then all of a sudden a storm comes through or clouds come through and the solar PV generation goes away, and then all of a sudden that load hits our system, then our generators have to kick in to make up that difference. Now, our generators can make up that difference without much trouble as long as it's not too much load. But when you combine the entire distribution system and all the load connected and PV connected, it could be critical. And so by having battery backup, then it doesn't have as great an impact on the system when you have an event.
In the last IRP, you looked at the dollars per stored megawatt for battery backup. It's very expensive compared to other alternatives. Has the cost of storage come down significantly in that time period?
I do not know. Eric might be able to.
So we do expect to see some price decreases as technology evolves. I can't give you a percentage based on it. We're working on updated prices, so when that study begins, then we'll have the most updated prices at that point.
The delta for the last IRP was very significant. Very 4-to-1 ratio or something.
Yeah, you mean the dollars or?
Well,
okay, so yes, so what we see here is that over that last point about ACE and recovery, is that the system has to maintain regulation over a certain time period, and it's maintained long-term and short-term. So when you have huge swings in your regulation, your generation has problems keeping up in some cases if that swing is large enough. Plus, over time, your control error, right? You're monitoring how well you control your system. It starts to get out of whack. If it gets too far out of whack, NERC says you got to do something different, right? And so when you look at your CPS, right, it's control performance standard, and it's looking at a 1 minute interval over a year, right? A rolling 12-month average. It's fine the first couple months, but you start to get into month 6, 7, and 8, and you can't keep up. Now you're in danger of being in a NERC violation long-term, because it takes a long time to make that back up. Does that make sense? So if you start to get in trouble early, you're going to pay for it for a long time before you get it back to that standard. So the call for backup generation is to make sure you can maintain that balance in a short period of time. So in the long-term study, when you start to look at it, it doesn't cause you a problem. There could be potential, there's other regulations in NERC that say you have to be balanced short-term as well, right? So those are all things that we have to factor in. And that's part of what that A study tried to incorporate. So that number is a recommendation to make sure that you can maintain control over your system. Some kind of quick start generation, battery, price, whatever, that when that solar flips on and off, or when that ramp comes in, you have something to mitigate that, to maintain your regulatory requirements.
Anyone else?
So when you say net metering, that is the basically the net that a facility might produce above and beyond what they would normally use, and then you average that out to get a number like over like a period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, our net metering program, it measures the flow of power into the customer's location, and any power that's generated more than they use when they generate it. It measures also the outgoing power onto our system. And at the once a year, we true up and all this is in the contract, and we pay the customer for the power that they generated that GRU used.
Just to clarify that, because I deal with this every day. So net metering means that you pay for the net of your power usage. So it's just how much did you buy from GRU, how much you send back to GRU, subtract the two, you pay for the net of that. Now, at the end of the year, if for the whole year you still have some excess left over, GRU will pay you for that at wholesale rate avoided cost. So it's a billing, basically, program.
So when you talk about offsetting part or all of the customer's electric consumption, so if a customer has, just say, maybe a 10 megawatt load at their facility, they could install a 10 megawatt solar facility and not meet that too, right? If they were just providing for their own, as long as they didn't export out onto the GRU system, is that correct?
Well, there's different tiers and I can't remember all those numbers, depending on the size of the customer. But as a general rule, for a customer that size, we have it on the slide.
Well, okay, so we just took a neighborhood, right? So everybody's got on top of their house, right? And so that aggregate winds up being maybe 10 megawatts of load. But if the each individual house is limited, so they can't export onto the GRU system, does that feed into that limit? So if they're not actually exporting onto there, is that a zero, or are you still looking at the solar that's on top of their roof?
Well, I do know that for individual, like residential customers, the PSC has a limitation of 2 megawatts per customer. And so, whereas GRU's limit is 2 megawatts per distribution feeder.
Okay, so maybe I'm not asking my question correctly. If the inverter is programmed so that I don't push onto the GRU system, and I have 1,000 homes, and then they produce 1 kilowatt X for whatever reason, right? And that excess doesn't go onto the GRU system. Is that counted into your net metering in terms of what you're allowed to put on a circuit?
Well, the meter is going to measure the power flow, no matter which direction it's going. And if it's putting it back on our system, it's going to take away from,
So let me try. So I don't know the answer, but I think I know the question.
Okay.
you're asking.
Yes.
So I think what he's asking is it about how much they're adding to the system, or is it just the capacity of the solar at that site? So if someone puts in a 2 megawatt solar on top of target, but they're planning on using all 2 megawatts that they generate, do they trip that threshold, or is it only about what they're pushing out to the system?
it's both. And the reason is because if I'm a customer and I'm generating 2 megawatts, and of course, that won't be the only customer. There'll be multiple customers with a similar scenario. Then the risk in that situation, even if you aren't pushing back out onto GRU system, is that in the cases where a storm comes through and cloud coverage shuts down the solar PV generation, then all of a sudden that's a change in voltage depending on how many are connected. And so then our customers get impacted. And so for certain scenarios, especially lightly loading conditions on a distribution circuit, it can cause voltage issues for us.
So, Mr. Chair, I think the answer is it's about not what is going out to the system. It's just about what demand solar system they're putting in there on because it can be both whether they're pushing out or a demand they need from the system as well. Is that accurate?
Accurate, yes.
So going back to Target, if they wanted to build a 900 kilowatt system and limited them to 700, they could put a 200 megawatt battery, and that would offset it. So they could still have a 900 megawatt system as long as they had a battery that would make up that difference.
Logically, that sounds correct, but we would have to do an impact study to verify that.
Jason, you had a.
Yeah, I have just a couple of, I'm relatively new to this particular conversations. I have a couple of questions to make sure I'm understanding clearly. You mentioned when you were talking about the Target example of, going back and looking at the records. And so one question I have is, might there be a significant difference between sort of nominal solar installation on a given feeder? So what your records show is installed versus what is actually being produced Or are those two things very closely aligned? Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I'm following you and, I think I may rely on my reliability engineer to answer that question based on our load flow studies. He does our load flow studies for us, so he might be able to speak more.
Do you need me to clarify that? Does that make sense? Right.
So you know which customers are connected to circuit and like, for example, if you look at the last slide, a little bit, there's power with solar panels. So you know that's the size, like it's I think 500 kW. And there's more customers, another 500, and there's some residential on the north side. If you something up, then you find the total of connected kW. And you compare that with your peak time, and then you can say that this the percentage of the TV connected based on the control, and also you can base that on 2 megawatts.
So you're looking at nominal system size, like,
Size of the TV system. The power flow can change anytime, like depending on the efficiency of the TV system, like it's like 2 megawatt in total, for example, but actually you can get the actual power flow is maybe less than it was more than. The equipment installed, the quality, the efficiency, all that.
okay.
So we need to correct it.
It will never be more than that, I can guarantee.
It's not more than, but yeah.
Okay.
Full efficiency, maximum 2 megawatts.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm wondering, what is the difference between, like, say that the study results that you're showing us here today and the kind of study that you might ask a customer like Target to do? Like what additional information would they be providing that hasn't already been provided by the sort of study that you showed us today?
Well, it would depend on the situation or the scenario, but what I would envision is that the impact study that the customer would pay for would be focused on that particular circuit only and the amount of PV that they're adding. Because the total distribution system study that was recently done by a third party, they were focused, and are they on the Zoom call? Could probably let him answer that firsthand. We do have a representative from the company that performed the independent study. So, Colin, are you on the call?
You tell.
Colin, you're muted.
That's on there.
There's something in the chat.
Yes, this is Winston Baptiste. I was part of the study. I work with Burns McDonnell, part of 1898 and co part of Burns McDonnell. If something like Target were to request this type of study, we would need to know the amount of generation that they're looking to produce, as well as how much they would be consuming as well. That's the reason that it would have to be particular, because this study in particular was done by information that was given by GRU. The only way we can do this type of study would be to know what type of load would be added onto the circuit that we're studying. So, of course, if, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. A couple more quick things. This is interesting. We talked briefly, it sounds like possibly AMI and some of the smart inverter type technologies that are rolling out will likely impact this conversation moving forward. Am I correct in that?
I guess it's possible, but we'd have to do a study to make sure.
Okay. So then just two quick observations based on what I understand here, the conversation so far. One, I'm not getting, given the data that you showed us today, why a blanket policy across the entire system makes sense, because the variance in the different feeders that you showed us seems to me that there are some places where we would not want 2 megawatts, and there are some places where we could do significant differences, basically. So I don't quite understand the justification for a system-wide approach versus like a feeder by feeder approach based on what the data is that you showed us today?
Okay, well, the reason why we did the study was because it was requested.
Right.
And I guess the main reason for not, the system is very dynamic. So people are adding load and adding PV, every day. And so what was true when this study was done is not true today. And so by limiting it to 2 megawatts as a general rule to start with, that kind of gives us a good base. But if we started telling people they couldn't on that one circuit that only allowed 0.8 megawatts, then of course, when we tell them, if we tell the customer they can't add any more to the circuit, then they're going to ask us to do an impact study. And we can. But I would say that every scenario is going to be a little bit different, and that all the changes that occur every day is going to change the system. And even GRU, impacts itself, because depending on load that's being added, we'll reconductor a circuit and install a larger conductor to accommodate additional load. I mean, we recently did that last year for the University of Florida East Data Center, which they added about 3 megawatts to one of our feeders. In order to accommodate that, we had to install a new feeder to relieve some of the load on that circuit so we could accommodate the data center. And I mean, that kind of stuff happens, every day. I mean, you see all the development going on in the downtown area and all the high rises going up. So it's very dynamic. So the best answer I have for that is what was true when the study was done is no longer true today. It may be close, but we would need to do an impact study to be sure.
Fair enough. And one last thing. We just made a couple of side comments here about storage. But in the future, if possible, I'd be really interested in exploring this topic further, the potential implications of storage. One, because it sounds like it potentially mitigates some of the issues that we're talking about, particularly if we were to say that somebody wants to come in and install a really large system like what Target was talking about. Okay, you can do that if there's an add-on storage component. And I like that because of the mitigation issue, but also it seems to me just a sort of basic fairness thing. If we're talking about a limitation per feeder and you've got one really big company with deep pockets that can come in and build a system that size, it sort of cuts out a heck of a lot of smaller businesses and homeowners and whatnot that might be within that same feeder. And it just seems to me kind of unfair to other folks that are trying to get the same benefits of distributed generation. So anyway, that's just a comment, but and I'll shut up. Thanks for the information.
Well, I think there's 2 megawatt limitations for one customer. The one customer cannot just come with 5 megawatts.
Well, one customer could come in and do 2 megawatts on a
Right.
clearing.
So the maximum of 2 megawatt, one for one customer.
We're talking about a feeder limit overall. Okay.
So that definitely can happen. So
Okay.
I have some questions, as you guys could imagine. It's not a huge list. We'll be out of here before 9. Just to give you guys an idea of my work. So what happens is we submit a letter of intent to GRU saying, hey, we'd like to put solar at this location. They come back and they may, here's an email. As of 6/21/22, the circuit has capacity below the threshold to allow such a system connection at the address indicated, which is a very confusing statement. We have to teach all the new guys, is that a goodie? That was good. That's what you want to hear. So it's a little weird, but that's how it works. So they'll say no, they'll say yes. So I have a number of clarifying questions. First, what I heard you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, the general limit is 2 megs per feeder. However, someone can come in and say, you guys have said the other opposite of this statement. No, we can come back and say, well, we'd like to do an impact or have an impact study done. You guys can come back and say, the answer is still no, or we've done an impact study. And yeah, you can do this. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
It's not a hard fast limit. It's a hard fast limit before an impact study is done.
Yes.
And I have in working other utilities, this happens. They'll come back and say yes, they'll say no, they'll say you need to install more capacitors in our substation because we need more VARs here. So there can be a number of different answers there. The answer to the question about on-site, one of the things, points out, we talked about AMI. We're kind of late to the table in AMI, which the good news is we've seen a lot of other people do it. We're kind of late to the table in having large PV capacity. So we can learn from others. So I think we will see that in other areas, people have experienced much larger loads or capacity than we have. So we can hopefully learn from that. So on, maybe this for Winston. So they did some modeling, and I've been modeling for years, not fashion modeling, obviously. No one had to laugh. But was that compared against the actual data? I mean, we do have data to say we have this much solar on this feeder. Here was the impact on GRU's ability to maintain voltage. Did the study do that, or was this just a theoretical study?
No, it was based on actual data, which was provided by GRU. As a matter of fact, it was provided by this gentleman sitting over here, Osman Bander.
So, did it look at the actual impacts on voltage regulation that you guys have seen on substantial amounts of study?
So from the program they call it Synergy Electric Simulation Program. And my experience is good at it, but I had some instances that we had some customer calling in my Chick-fil-A and Buffalo, our prior to shut down because of the low voltage. And simulation program calculated like a very close result. So the third company, they use the same simulation program, and the results are pretty accurate. And the data we provided coming from JS, and we provided, and they also double checked if the system makes sense, or if there's any any section that doesn't make sense, it's not precise, different than the next section and stuff like that. So they double check the information also. So the information they have, in my opinion, is pretty accurate, and the results, because of that information, the model is accurate, the results are pretty close, but it isn't the real life.
Okay, and it does. I appreciate it. I appreciate hearing that. That's good to hear. Because I know when having been around solar for a long time, I was there when the 2 meg came in, and the discussion was, we feel like 2 meg is a safe number. We'll learn more over time. We'll review this to see, hey, can we put more? Is it too low, too high? I mean, I have to say, for people to understand that most utilities don't love what I do, coming in and selling net metered solar, because it's the same infrastructure. They're now selling less power. Especially in Florida, it's monopoly. This is not a criticism. We are a highly regulated state. And so having someone come in with an alternative is not ideal. I'd say for the most part, GRU has been easy to work with. It hasn't been adversarial. We haven't felt like, and some utilities are not that way. So I do appreciate what you guys are doing and do recognize the plus and minus. When we talk about batteries, though, I get very excited because I think there are some real opportunities for win-win scenarios for demand side management, especially incorporating them with some smart inverters to help maintain and regulate the utility. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with the utility to come up with these kind of win-win solutions moving forward. I think that's about all I have. I mean, I think you guys answered the questions. I mean, to have the flexibility to do a study to say really what's possible, I think makes a lot of sense and what we should be doing. Anyone else from the board have any questions? From the public.
I don't have any questions. I learned a lot. Thank Jason asked some good questions. I like the discussion about batteries and the possibility of their impact on these decisions.
And so what I heard, and I just want to be clear, I think you guys were pretty clear because I get this question a lot. So if I put in solar and I don't send anything back to the grid, you'll still tell me, no, that's too much. I mean, that by having solar, even though it has nothing's moving through the meter, is still an impact to the grid. Is that what I'm hearing?
If I'm hearing you correctly, if a customer, as long as they don't connect to our distribution system and they install their own solar and they have a separate feed and there's no connection to us, then they can install as much solar as they want.
Right. I was talking about if they have it set up where nothing goes back to the grid, it's just helping to offset what's in the house. So the house is still, or the facility is still connected to the grid, because you can program them to say, don't send anything back to the grid.
Right. Well, we still have the issue of, again, one customer is not going to be a deal breaker. But when you combine that with all the customers, then we still have to be concerned about when all that solar goes away during a storm or cloud coverage, then we've got to have the ability to make up that generation instantaneously.
Understood. Now,
And-
if someone wanted to, like, maybe it was to Dan, put in batteries, then there would have to be some kind of study to say, how are you programming the batteries, I'd assume, and to see what
Yes,
the impact would be. Like.
but installing batteries would allow them to go over the limit.
And to Jason's point about the homeowners, because, if, let's say you're on a feeder with a 2 meg limit, you come in and one person comes and installs 2 meg, everybody else is sold, sorry, with the limit. Have you guys thought about maybe we'll get it to 90% for the big ones and hold back a few for those little 5K systems?
We really have not. It's been a first come, first serve, because like I said, we have one, actually probably a total of 3 employees that spend at least 50% of their time working on these interconnection requests. And so it's time consuming from that standpoint. And so we'd be talking about having to add more bodies to monitor and track it that closely.
And when I say that, I fully appreciate.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot easier just to have one system and be done. And have to deal with a bunch of options. So, anything else on this topic?
Battery's a lot better than a bunch of rice in your backyard.
Right in your back? All right, thank you very much for that presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so moving along now, the final thing we have today, I think it's talking about the UAB work plan.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll make a few comments as I look at the work plan. We don't have anything specifically scheduled for the next UAB meeting, which is in July. One of the topics that I'm not positive we could be prepared for, but I think we can, is natural gas rebates. But there was discussion at the last UAB meeting of making that a broader discussion about other rebates. And so we would not be prepared to do that. We could, like I said, we could be prepared from staff perspective to do a discussion on the natural gas rebates. I just need to confirm that and make sure we have staff to do that. The other option, which could be a useful time for you as the Utility Advisory Board, is really, I think there needs to be a discussion with you as a board of truly what are your priorities, what kind of things do you want to work on, what are the issues that you want to address. And so you could use the July meeting as a time to really establish for you all to work out as a board what those priorities were and be more specific about scope and what you're looking to achieve with the items. So that's just a recommendation, but this is really up to you all on where you want to go in the next step.
Thank you. And I have to say, I appreciate your thoughts on that, and I appreciate that recommendation. I think as we're starting to see as a board, we need to have some time in these workshops to and we used to do more of this, just to have free time to talk. And I think this question, what are we trying to accomplish this year? And do we have our policy document that's been kind of sitting stagnant? We want to revise that.
We've needed to have a session like that for a long time.
Yes, so I think that would be good. Again, we are an advisory board. We have no real power. We have no power over GRU. They do things at times at our request, but our total job is to advise.
We're limited to 2 megawatts per person.
Mr. Chair, if I could, personally, I would like to see us break off this natural gas rebate conversation separately and get moving on that, because maybe I'm naive, but I felt like we were moving towards some sort of a recommendation that everybody maybe could live with. And then we had all this turnover that happened, turned over membership of this board, turnover of our GM, like everything. So now it's almost like we're starting from scratch. And so before that happens again, I would like to see us get the conversation going and like get folks up to speed and really kind of move this forward personally.
So if as a board, you all make a motion to have us move forward with that, I will just say I probably need a couple of days just to make sure we can revive all of that. I think there has been work done. I'm just not familiar with all of that's been done, and make sure that we can get it ready for the July meeting. If not, we could commit to doing it in the August meeting, but I could take a shot at seeing if we can get it for the July meeting.
But by it, you're talking about rebates for natural gas?
Is that the will of the board? I would love to see us either do it or don't do it or do
Exactly.
something.
Yep.
Our ability to do nothing has been tremendous.
Don't think so. The July meeting is on, right?
Yes, it had to be rescheduled from Thursday, the 14th. It'll be on July 19th, Tuesday the 19th.
That's the date you sent out.
Yes, sir. That's gonna be your regular meeting, and then you'll still have your July workshop. And what we'd like to use that time for is to have the legal department give you the orientation on the sunshine law and ethics and that sort of thing.
Anything else? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, one other thing that I don't think needs to be very lengthy, but I do think would be valuable. GRU just spent a nice little chunk of money sending myself and Cubby to the APPA conference. And I haven't had a chance to talk with him yet, but I found it to be really exciting. And there's definitely things from that I would love to, share with the group if we could have that on an upcoming agenda as well.
I think that would be another good workshop.
He asked that too. He couldn't be here tonight, but he did ask me if there would be an opportunity for him to share with Mr. Covey.
How do you guys feel about doing that also at the July meeting? Report?
Yeah, show and tell.
And I'll just ask Mr. Chair, if you all could like make a motion and we can get it in the minutes, that way it'll drive us for setting the agenda. So if you want to do that at the workshop or at the regular meeting, same thing with the natural gas item. If you all can make a motion, hey, we're looking for these things, it'll just help us to make sure we're following kind of the will of the.
Appreciate it. No, we talked about doing the natural gas at the workshop, but my understanding, we can't vote at a workshop.
I think we're talking about doing that at the regular meeting. on the 19th.
So this is the 19th regular meeting. I think maybe I'll make a motion. Well, first, is there a motion to give Jerry and staff would be available and ready for a presentation of the next July regular meeting?
I'll move that.
Second?
Second.
Discussion?
I don't think we need to devote a whole evening to the rebate question. We could have plans for UAB in addition to natural gas questions.
Oh, yeah.
I'd accept that as a friendly amendment.
Don't spend the whole evening on it.
Yeah.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Also, so the next one was having the members who attended APPA to present at the next workshop. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion?
I never got to debrief after last year's. And we had a lot of good stuff in Orlando.
I think COVID made it tough. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, are we ready to move on from this topic? Okay, member comment. Do we have any member comments?
I have one, sorry to be so talkative, but I don't know if other folks saw this press release from City of Gainesville, but the city was nationally recognized recently by the Department of Energy for integrating their the home energy score methodology. So for folks that aren't aware, the City of Gainesville passed a rental housing ordinance a year or so ago, and they're actually going to be inspecting a huge number of the rental housing in Gainesville for basic safety standards, but also for energy and water efficiency standards, which is incredible because you can show nationwide that renters pay more in utility bills than homeowners do. So this is a really big deal. The city of Gainesville is taking this really innovative, interesting approach with having their in-house staff that go out and do these inspections actually use this home energy score methodology. I'm super excited about it. And I just am wondering, and maybe this is a question that can be answered quickly, but I know that GRU sends folks out to people's homes. And I'm wondering basically about how many of those home visits are happening per year, a sort of very general idea of like what folks do when they're on those home visits. And then lastly, if there's any appetite or interest potentially in GRU staff sort of aligning with city staff in implementing any sort of a home energy score methodology. Because what would be really amazing, we're having this conversation within the Community Weatherization Coalition as well, is if you have multiple agencies that are using the same methodology to assess housing stock, it would open us up for really tremendous potential in terms of energy and water savings in this community.
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, I don't know the answers, precise answers to those questions, but that's something we can bring up in one of the July meeting or workshop and give an update on, how many we do, how many energy and water audits we do, and if this methodology is something that our staff would be able to do as part of that process. So we can bring an update in July.
And I'd like to know any follow-up metrics before and after consumption patterns and so forth.
To follow protocol, is that a motion?
I'd like to make that a motion if folks are okay with that. I think it's a relatively short conversation, just getting some information.
Yeah,
from
I think
GRU.
giving an update would be.
Do we have a second on that motion?
Amen.
So just real quickly, this is such an important topic. For those of you, I know Jason's very heavily involved. I'm on the board of CWC, but Jason gets out there, Jeff Shapiro gets out there in the community, actually doing it with something I'd love to have time to do and want to do, because it's the rental homes. The landlords aren't always incentivized to make them energy efficient. These are people who can't afford, who have tremendous power bills. I mean, utility bills, sorry, water, waste, everything is just incredible. There's so much ability to be doing things for people who need it the most. I think this.
When an audit is done, where do the results go back to the renter or to the landlord?
Typically to the renter, that they're the ones covering the utility bill.
But it's going to be going, the results of these home energy scores are going to go to both because the landlord will be required to bring the units.
Right,
up to spec. Yeah, yeah. And it also is kind of a consumer education piece too, because now potentially when you're getting ready to rent a place, you can not only know what the rent's going to be, but you can have a pretty good idea of like what the energy costs are going to be. Which is huge.
Understood.
Yeah, you see that low rent and then get hit with a $500 power bill, utility bill.
If the Department of Energy nationwide has evaluated the program, maybe we could patch in on Zoom or something, somebody from DOE or something who might want to comment or compare it with other comparable organizations and such things.
So, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that would be great. It's some, GRU in the city needs to trumpet what we're doing well, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So we have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anything else? Thank you. Your comments are always well thought. Now we have member comment. I guess that was
my
our
member
comment.
That was it.
Any other member comments? One thing I wanted to say, so I've gotten some feedback from GRU staff that sometimes they have felt that UAB members have said things directly. I mean, it's one thing that they weren't, I'm trying to think how to say this, saying that that staff was saying things that weren't true. Or hiding things, and they've been offended by that, and rightly so. Now, it's not my job to tell you what you can and can't say. If someone believes that's true, I think it should be said. But I think we have to be very careful how we speak. And I think, these are professionals, and to say that someone's doing something dishonest, we better be ready to back that up. So just some feedback. GRU staff takes a beating out there. It breaks my heart. It really, I get upset that GRU staff, and I've talked to a number of them, won't wear GRU shirts out in public because they get attacked. It's really that bad out there. Anything else anyone has? All All right, with that, I will, the next meeting is on the
19th.
we have a joint city commission meeting on the 18th.
Oh, on the 18th, that's
Then we
right.
have a meeting on the 19th.
That'll finish up the budget on the 18th.
Correct. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
At 8 o'clock.